Hi accomplices, thanks for joining me today. We're going to talk about the colors that we explored in a recent video about my trip to Mexico, getting the blues and greens, but we're going to apply them to a canvas today. I love putting watercolor onto canvas, straight from the tube with a credit card, piece of plastic. The colors stay vibrant, get lots of great texture. So today I'm going to use a reference again from my trip to Mexico recently. I love this photograph, the intensity of the clouds, the shadows underneath, and the blues and the greens, and I thought it would be a really good way to show you applying the pigment to the canvas, of course, but also lifting and how important that is, and how that can really shape and form the image that you're creating. It's just, for me, one of the really fun and quick ways to apply pigment. So we'll work with today an oval shape. I think this would be fun. The roundness of it reminded me of the the beautiful shape and the waves and how things move when the wind blows things around, and the white caps on the waves, and here we don't have, in this image, we don't have trees and shrubbery and things, but lots of movement, and to an artist's eye was really quite stunning. I held up the group a lot of times just because I needed to stop and take another photo. So I think that's important, take the time, observe, capture things on camera if you can, talk to people, and I don't know, I think it's just a really lovely way to share your art. A shout out to Sheila from Enderby, a local community who stopped me in our Costco store the other day and recognized me from my channel, and we had a great chat about art, and I just love that connection. It makes it feel, I don't know, more real and more special when you can share it. So I'm happy to be able to do this. So watercolor on canvas, I typically will wet my canvas, and this is just a simple dollar store canvas. I am not going to give any special treatment to it. I'm adding some water. Typically, I will leave some of the canvas dry. With this, because it's such an overall design, I'm going to do it all, and I'm going to do the lifting where I want things to stay white. So while that is just soaking into my canvas slightly, I'm going to pick my colors and straight from the tube, and I'm using photo paper and the back of it. I don't want to use the shiny side. There's an emulsion on there that allows, when you're printing a photo, allows the ink to really adhere. Don't need that, and I don't need the emulsion mixing in with our pigment and our paint. So I'm going to turn it over. The back of it is a matte finish. It's not going to allow the pigments to soak in. They'll sit there, and I can pick them up with my credit card or plastic as I need to. So the colors in this, I'm going to go back to my trusty Mayan Dark Blue, I think, for this dark under part of the cloud. There's some cobalt blue looking color over here, and the rest is sort of a gray mix, and I think I might just try some neutral tint in there. And then down here I'm going to use some ultramarines, and over on this side I've actually got a bit of buff titanium, which is a more opaque color. And I will put those on a separate piece of paper in a few moments, the lighter colors. Right now I'm going to put the darker colors on. So my Mayan Dark Blue, I use Daniel Smith paints pretty much exclusively. I love the pigmentation, I love the formulation in them, and I've come to know them as a part of my team. I know how they're going to perform, and really appreciate how that all comes together. So the Mayan Dark Blue, And I didn't bring a cobalt out with me, so I'm going to just go back to my palette and I'm going to wet that, because I think the amount that I need, I can just pick up with a little piece of plastic from my palette. So I'll just wet that and get it ready and waiting in the wings. And let's try a little bit of phthalo. No, I won't try the. I liked the ultramarine. I think was the other color that I'd found earlier, and I'll use that for the water. I don't need very much of it. And then I mentioned that we would use neutral tint, and so I'm going to wet that as well, because I think what I need from that I can just pick up from my palette. All right. I'll have my little piece of plastic from a produce tab, an old credit card, and we're ready to go. So I've got, bring this over to the camera so you can see it, Mayan Dark Blue and then an Ultramarine Turquoise. And I'm just going to pick a tiny bit of that up, the Mayan Dark Blue, and I'm going to put that just along where that cloud base is. And then the Ultramarine Turquoise is going to be a bit of the horizon, the edge of where the water meets the sky. And then with our little one, I'm going to just scrape up a tiny bit of the cobalt blue and get that working in this area over here where that little piece of blue sky was popping through. And the other color that I wanted to use is the neutral tint, and that's going to give some nice shadowy cloud effects. Okay. Now you can see where the water here has pulled the pigment down, and if I tip that just slightly, I'm just going to grab a brush and pull some of that through. It's going to feather and flow down in through the water. And I'm going to encourage that with just a little bit more water. And then the plant mister, facial mister. And I'm just going to allow those pigments to just move around on the page, on the canvas. And where it's pooling on the edge, I can just allow that to run off and pick that up. And I'm just going to move that Mayan Dark Blue around just a tiny bit more. I do want those shadows. And as the surface dries, the pigment will continue to move around. Okay, so we want lots of white effects on our sky and in our water. So I'm just pulling that color around. There's a fair bit of water because I sprayed it on the surface. So I'm going to just take my paper towel, and I'm not concerned that it's got pigment and water already on it. And I'm just going to go through and pick out some cloud shapes. Keeping in mind that this is going to continue to move as long as there's moisture on the surface. And I can tip it and get that beautiful flow of color. If it doesn't move fast enough, you can tap it a tiny bit. If you tip the surface, you can see where it's wet, where it's drying. Things will continue to move. Now, because I've used this brush, this 3-line solo brush from Watercolor Online, some of the hairs do come out because I'm pretty brutal with these guys, and I can pick those off the surface later once my painting has dried. Okay. So again, just get some cloud shapes happening there. I'm going to go back in now and add some. I think the sand part of this painting can be probably done mostly with the buff titanium. Again, it's a Daniel Smith brand paint, a little more opaque than most of the other pigments that I use, but I think quite beautiful. And you can see where the surface of the canvas was a little bit drier, so you get a more textured look of where the land can be. So I'm going to take that. I'm also going to add, I've got a little bit of burnt umber here, and straight from the tube, just because I do want some highlights, but I'm not going to put very much on this paper, just a tiny bit, because I only want just the hint of dark for accents. Now, when I look at my reference photo, I can see that a lot of the cloud bank is right along that back surface. Oh, I've stuck that right in my, but that's gonna, you can see I touched the iPad to it and it lifted a bit of the paint, but you can see where it's actually moving, the water's moving it right back to where it was, so we're okay. Happy little accidents, as they say, right? So I'm going to take my paper towel and just fold it a few times just to get a bit of an edge there. And I'm just going to tap that along that horizon line. Okay. Now that's removed the water from that area, so things aren't going to continue to bleed back and forth. And then I can go in with a corner of my paper towel, just a corner, and I can build some of those cloudy shapes that were happening in the background. And they're very subtle. So you've still got the pigment that's on the canvas showing through. And if I change my paper towel so that there's no pigment on it, it should get a little bit whiter. Some of the pigments that we use are a bit more staining than others, and that's fine. I think we've got so many to choose from, and each of the pigments has its own properties and brings a new level of sometimes interest, sometimes challenge. So I'm just softening these edges on this underside of this cloud a little bit. Just encouraging. This is still a bit damp up in the sky, and so I just like to make sure that that's all coming together. It's when you use this much water, it's a challenge sometimes to keep an eye on all the pieces of the design. You never know when the water and the pigment are going to take off and do something that you weren't expecting or planning on. So I've dipped my paper towel into my water bucket, so it's quite damp. And I just want to touch those edges, adding a tiny bit of water. I'm barely touching, but where I pull those brush marks out, I don't really want those lines. And so I'm just going to soften those. And because there's water on the surface and it will continue to move and to dry. And we'll just keep on making some cloud shapes as we go along, and let the water continue to move and dry as it needs to. And now we'll go back down to our water and our sand area, and we're going to get rid of that line that we conveniently put in with the iPad. Sometimes we just have to go with the flow. Okay. Now in this design, we have the sand. And in my photograph, the sand sort of comes this way and works its way sort of across the bottom of the page. So I'm going to pick that buff titanium up, and I'm going to spread it out the whole length of my card, but it's thicker in some spots, and that's great. That's just how it needs to be sometimes, to just get it on the surface. So now we've got a little bit of sand coming in. The other color that I put on here was the burnt umber, and I'm going to take that on the very edge of my credit card. I'm not going to smear it this way. I'm just going to get it on the edge, because I just want a few little indications of a bit of a darker line, and then maybe a bit of the darker on the bottom. Now, one thing that I probably, now that I'm thinking of it, could have done is to find the center on each side, because it to me looks like I'm a bit off kilter with my horizon, and I am well known for uneven horizons, as I've mentioned before. My husband says I have no sense of depth perception, but that's okay. We'll call that a bit of a landmass in the background, maybe. There. So with the buff titanium, because it's quite opaque, I'm just going to lightly touch this with a very gently damp brush, and I'm just going to bring this sanded area and just give it a bit of texture. And the last thing I want to do with this one now is to get some of that wave action happening. And you know, if for some reason you can't get it to the whiteness that you want, you can always use, there's Dr. Martin's bleed-proof white that is really handy to have, and you can apply that with a nib pen or with just a brush and dab it on, and that would give you some nice, really crisp white lines for your wave tops. But I think in keeping with, so what I'm doing is, this is very wet, and I'm just pushing it so that there's a very fine surface, fine on the edge, a line, and I'm just going in and picking up some of the pigment as we go along. As with all of my paintings on canvas, watercolor on canvas, it's easy to go in with a firm brush. Typically these brushes are, you can find them in the acrylic brush section in your local craft store or art store. I like that they have a nice, really fine point on them. And I can go in now and pull out some highlights on the shore. Fairly dry brush. If it was to be too wet, of course, it would just add more water to the surface and the pigments would want to follow that out. So I like to just turn my canvas slightly. And this technique is really handy in creating shorelines and baselines, and if you wanted to, you could add some buildings along the one shore, and that's easily done with with a little piece of plastic. And I don't know that I have the right size here, but you can take one of these and break them and use a smaller edge, and you dip it into a color. And for buildings it usually doesn't matter as long as it's a darker color. And just lay them along the side. Put a lower building down this way, and some more taller ones there. And we'll put a little low one there, and maybe a pier coming out. And there pretty much is your scene. And you can fiddle with your buildings a little more if you want. But I think we've got a pretty good example of a little beach scene. Easy to add. You could add trees to the front if you wanted to. I'm going to just, because in the photo there was a bit of the frothy waves sort of at the shoreline. So I'm wetting my brush, dabbing it slightly because I don't want it to and then picking up some of it that way. So this is called scumbling, I believe. Okay. And then we'll just put a little bit of a horizon line under the buildings in the background. If you thought your clouds here were a bit dark, you can just add a tiny bit of water and lift out a bit of it. Okay. And there you have a quick and easy Mexico seascape. And say the fun of applying watercolor to canvas, really there's not much you can't do with it. So I would encourage you to give it a try. Thanks for joining me today. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe to my channel or visit my website, bandrystudio.com. That's BANDRAOI studio.com.